Hello, Michael. How's it going?
Volume feels weak. Is it weak?
Your volume is a bit weak. Yes. Have you got any way to adjust that?
I don't know. What do you think right now? Sound bad?
Oh, it improved then. It just jumped up.
All right. Let's
Keep.
put the mic all the way up and have obnoxious, like a small penile device right
Yeah.
in my
Sometimes we have
mouth.
to sacrifice our fashion for audio quality.
I don't know. Is that serviceable, or should we try a different mic?
That's good. I give it about a 7 out of 10.
All right, that's good enough then for me.
Yeah, let's go with that. So I was blown away watching you on Joe Rogan. Not just your personal story, but the social criticism, the things that you said, so important, especially because on our channel we've interviewed a lot of ex-cops and we're members of LEAP, fully supporting a reversal of the war on drugs. And for the viewers then who are perhaps not familiar with your story, could you just give a bit of background as to what it was like for you growing up, why you ended up aspiring to join the cops, and what your goals were when you joined the cops, and what actually happened?
Well, I mean, I have to say, I don't know whether any of us actually know these things. We have our ideas about. I think we wish we remembered these things, but I mean, basically, I grew up rather poor, like Section 8 housing, had government assistance, a single mother family. In the '90s, watching television shows like Knight Rider and cops on things on TV all the time, and I thought, yeah, what better of a thing for me, a bonehead that doesn't do well in school, to go out and extra kill 4 years to 21, join the Marine Corps, and then join the police department. I mean, what better to do than a poor kid if you want to climb up, go to college, and do something that feels important? I mean, I'm not going to deny that policing is important by any means. I think it is a necessary evil, and I'm about refining that evil. But so I grew up watching all those things. Went into the Marine Corps. Had a great time in the Marine Corps till I was 21. I came out of the Marine Corps, and my skill set obviously transitioned well to being a knocker and street cop in Baltimore. And as I was there, just trying to do good like anybody else did, you just start to see problems within the organization, trying to be a professional. And that's really where I was coming from all along, is I'm trying to be a professional, try to do policing at its best. And you're watching the same things be done over and over, that with negative results that are maybe even worsening the situation, if not, at least stagnant. Watching this in management malfunctions, just crappy people getting promoted, like in many other organizations, or pure mismanagement from a cop running the biggest budget item in the entire city. All your tax money goes to some dude with a high school education running an organization. This stuff, none of this stuff made sense to me. Going out on the street, being a drug cop, I was out when I did major crimes, went after a bunch of violent gangs, did all kinds of covert surveillance, did all the real cop shit that you all watching The Wire and stuff like that, going after the Omars, going after the Barksdales, chasing people with guns through the alleys. And none of it ended up doing jack shit. I was doing the same thing they did on The Wire, the same thing they did in Homicide, the same thing they did in The Corner. It's literally the same, like, personalities and everything. Like I'm like a version of McNulty, and then there's somebody else that's like a version of him that came before then, and it's just this constant repeating cycle. So I was then used by the media, I would say, because what I was saying about improving policing and being critical of policing as an organization carried over at the time of the Black Lives Matter movement. And when I say something like policing is discriminatory towards poor people, the media will hear that is policing is discriminatory towards black people because they think black and poor is related, when that is not at all what I am saying. They'll come out with messages like I'm saying black people don't commit crime. Absolutely not what I'm saying. They commit crime more than anybody else in the entire country. I'm saying that there are reasons for these things that are not the fact that they're a human being. They're an ape, just like everybody else. Race is not real. So we are not looking at the right problems. Like, to say that a black person does this is not even a viable metric when it comes to talking about crime reduction and how an organization should run. So I bitched about the prominence came about because I bitched when Freddie Gray was killed in Baltimore. For people that don't know, very small kid. He gets arrested for drug dealing, nonviolent offenses, gets thrown into a paddy wagon, taken to prison, and he dies somewhere along the way. I don't think the paddy wagon driver did it. But the point of the matter is you have to get a juvenile child suspect or young adult, doesn't matter, to prison safely. And there's no excuse for that. But our agency came out making excuses left and right. And so I just said, fine, if you want to deny the obvious, let's talk about the things we obviously do, and I'll stand behind those things. And I tweeted a bunch of stuff that kind of, got like Joe Rogan's attention and stuff like that, and led to me being on there. And a lot of people talking about, let's say, like what is like the bleed that leads. Everybody loves the drug stories and all the exciting stuff. But I ended up continuing on and doing my PhD program and trying to like focus on why policing actually malfunctions and what we are doing wrong and presenting solutions. But I have to say, I found out that media and activists have absolutely no desire to solve problems. It's not even what their incentives are. So I don't really know what I was doing being a prominent public figure. We can stop right there.
Can you give us an example, Mike, of a close shave story when you were on the front line as a cop?
I mean, close line stories. So I guess, they go back a while. I feel like they're all very close because you're chasing.
What was the most danger you ever found yourself in?
Oh, well, see, that's the thing is, so your question is actually, where did I feel the most fear? And that's actually like, I guess I don't process the fear emotion that way.
Aren't you trained to steel your nerves in a situation so you
they
wouldn't
say
experience
that.
fear?
I don't believe that's actually true. I think you're predisposed to that, and then the training is actually just a weeding out process of who can do it and who can't. So I was never very fearful of things, multiple reasons. I felt I was more highly skilled than the person I was going up against. So I wasn't very worried about that. And empirically, I studied the data. I know the most dangerous thing I was going to do as a cop was go to a domestic violence and have my guard down. So the most dangerous thing I could actually do was be complacent. Those moments when I was very intense. Situations where I'm chasing a guy with a gun. So a gun call comes out. There's somebody's armed on the corner. I climb up onto a roof and I peek on them at the corner. I see they have the gun on them, flashing around to their friends. And then I just run up on them and jump out of the car and like chase them down and go down an alley. Like, yeah, those things feel like they should be the stories of danger, but they're not actually where police find danger. Police find danger in domestic violence situations when their guards down and by driving a car.
Do you have an example of a domestic violence situation you attended where you had to be particularly aware of your surroundings?
No, I wouldn't say that. I would say more so on the investigation side of it. So I came in like a kid, thinking the domestic violence situations are 95% male instigated, and that's who's going to be the problem all the time. And boy, reality taught me a different story. I mean, like I can remember one where I went and I was investigating domestic call. The girl was pretty beat up, and she had marks all over her neck. He was obviously in denial, but even the dudes that do beat the creep back out of their girlfriends deny it. I'm not saying that, but he was in denial. And eventually I had her tell her story. And the only major flaw in her story was that he choked her like this. And I could tell that the markings were like this. And so when I brought that up, then she ends up confessing that she was lying and she choked herself and she did these things like he was saying she did. No. And under most circumstances, he would have ended up arrested and would have had a record on him. So things like that taught me to be more aware of my surroundings and more of I think I spent most of my life just fighting kind of media narratives and general society narratives that stand in contrast to reality. So like people will say, the 911 call said this, so the cop should have said that. And cops will justify their actions based upon a 911 call. Well, that is an anonymous source calling somebody that you have no idea what their motives and intentions are. And I learned this the hard way. What I observed, it was my fault, essentially, for somebody dying. When I got a 911 call for an armed person, I found this person. I went up to him. I caught him in the corner, started searching him, looking all around for what he was doing wrong. And when I ended up searching him and I cleared him, he had no gun on him, and I let him go. And I figured, okay, whatever, another dumb call. It wasn't a few minutes later, as I went about my way, that I got another call for a shooting, and it was that guy with his brains blown out in broad daylight on the corner of the street. I was definitely their weapon in making sure that he was unarmed before they jumped him. So just like getting an unarmed call should not be taken so lightly and presumed to be anything that it appears from the outside. So I think actually being the institutional knowledge of a cop through experience is really the most difficult journey that a cop is going through.
What are the consequences then for people who manipulate the police in that fashion? For example, did that female, was she then charged for staging those injuries?
Well, because I was there, yeah, she was arrested and charged. So I took her away for filing a false report and doing trying to set him up with false charges. But the odds, but that just makes me realize that not only, like, I'm not special for catching that situation. What it really tells me is not only have I missed these situations, I'm pretty darn good at this. If I'm missing these situations, how many other situations are being missed? And just really built the perspective to stand back from policing. We all get caught up in anecdotal evidence and think that's important to ourselves. Like the British and American justice systems both see, for instance, justice as being revenge for the victim. And if you stand back just beyond the immediate, obviously that's a very ill-fated idea of what justice is seeking revenge for. I mean, you're obviously in an endless cycle, and you're not doing anything to prevent the event from its recurrence. So I always just wanted to find ways to prevent the crime from recurring instead of actually capturing the bad guy. If I had a choice between capturing some kid's killer and making sure no kids were ever killed again, I don't think it's a difficult decision, but societally that seems to be an impossible hurdle.
So in the comments, 12-Step Woman has put, literally an officer is killed on the job on a daily basis in the USA. Did
Not
you lose
remotely
any?
true.
Did you lose any colleagues?
For one, that's not remotely true.
Okay.
Double-digit numbers at the highest are ever killed in policing in America. Usually you're talking between 10 and 20 that are killed per year in America by violent offenses. The vast majority of officer deaths are vehicle related. It's just any job that operates a vehicle, like a taxi cab driver is one of the most dangerous jobs in the world, because anything driving a vehicle is going to end up with most of its injuries and problems when it comes to driving that actual vehicle. So I had colleagues that were lost. Unfortunately, one was lost on the streets, but the rest of them were all lost to car crashes and friendly fire. We had 2 officers that were lost to so-called friendly fire, and that's another instance of the things that I'm talking about that are just perpetually bad, that have solutions that really just aren't integrated and things aren't done to save officers' lives. Or we had an officer that died essentially because the placement of the laptops in the car crushed her when she crashed. And we knew that, but yet still those laptops are mounted in the exact same position in the cars today. We had 2 officers that were killed because they responded in plain clothes to incidences in which uniformed on-duty members were responding to, which is always something that needs to have tight protocols involving them. And still to this day, we do not have tight protocols in Baltimore, and many agencies don't, on how they interact between uniformed officers and plainclothes officers. And so, I mean, unfortunately, as I've said many times, the actual reality is though, although the streets are scary, the actual agency is more dangerous to a police officer than the streets are.
So I've watched these LEAP videos then, and they say, the purpose of the police, going back to Robert Peel, has been to take person A out of society that harms person B. And if you look how crime has been defined for millennia, murder, robbery, rape, theft, there's a person A, person B. But then when you had mass incarceration, they went after the lowest hanging fruit to fill the private prisons, which was the drug users. I think marijuana possession was hundreds of thousands of arrests a year at the peak of the war on drugs. What are your thoughts on that, on the war on drugs and LEAP policy?
I would say that from, well, I'm not going to support LEAP, but I'll support just the general concept that I think the data is inarguable that regulation and legalization is absolutely the way to go. I don't want things to be a free for all market. I think they should be legal and under the guidance of the medical system. Not saying that's that's not going to have its problems, but it's about harm reduction. That the difference between legalized markets and I want to say legalized and regulated because that is the best thing to do. That like overdoses that you see on the streets, people call them overdoses, but I definitely disagree. I think the vast majority of them are homicides because the person is buying, thinking they're buying so many grams of heroin and they're actually getting so many milligrams of fentanyl. And so that's a poisoning. That's not an overdose. The overdoses are usually have to be intentional. That has to be suicide to be an overdose. So most actual overdoses are suicides. Anything else is a poisoning for the vast majority because even junkies, so to say, don't tend to OD on pharmaceutical quality drugs because you're not going to, you know what it is, you know what it's going to do, you've been down this road before. The mystery and the street quality is really the problem when it comes to human interaction with drugs. It's like many things that we're dealing with in our society. It's actually the policy that's harming us, not the thing that the policy is supposed to be reducing. That is blatantly, obviously, when it comes to drugs. I mean, for instance, we're like, what would we do if we legalized? But it's like things weren't illegal until modern history. I mean, you could order heroin from the Montgomery Ward catalog. So the idea of what would we, it's one of those things where I'm constantly freaking out. Where it's the weird question is how do you operate where drugs are illegal, not how do you operate where drugs are legal. 99.99999% of human civilization in history has been under completely unregulated drug markets, and it's an entirely new thing. And we were fine, it seems. We got here. We're okay.
Yeah, I remember reading that about back in the 1800s, heroin. You could get heroin and a needle for like pennies, I think it was, from certain department stores. Could you explain to viewers what CLP is?
So civilian-led policing is one of the things I did while I was doing my academic studies, just to demonstrate how many alternatives there are. There are activists that going around and they yell around about how they're going to change policing and what they're going to do. And all their plans ever actually are is how they're going to be in charge of the exact same system that they're arguing is corrupt. So what I was doing is I was taking a lot of business management principles and established things like stakeholder theory, shareholder theory, interviewing techniques, how you build consensus among people with different interests. And I combined those theories together to say, what would this established science look like if we applied it to policing, where we didn't take the biggest line item in a city, trust those hundreds of millions of dollars to some guy with a GED and wonder about how it all got wasted. So what would happen if we actually did this? What would policing look like? And this is one way that you can use established scientific techniques to better align what the community wants with what the policing are doing. One thing that I would definitely argue, a lot of people are complaining that police do exactly when their police do exactly what their community asks them to do, and they don't like the outcome. So one thing about civilian-led policing is it takes the responsibility and it places it on the community. So when they have that power, they also have the responsibility for the police and policy that goes wrong. And I actually think that that's incredibly fearful for people. They'd rather blame some politician and then just vote the next guy in thinking something's going to change. Rather than taking accountability, we look at policing situations like we have a bad outcome and we say, oh my God, we didn't like the way this ended up. But that is just not the way to approach anything with human behavior. We need to be focused on the process. And if the police officer followed the specified processes that the community agreed upon and we had a bad outcome, that bad outcome is on the community. It is not on the police officer. But it's issues like that where I'm talking about aligning it that kind of hit against human nature and our desire to accept accountability for what we send our soldiers to do, essentially.
You've got a question coming from Anne about your thoughts on fentanyl and the deaths.
Yeah, so I think those are poisonings, and I think those are poisonings that the government is obviously allowing, and that is these are one of the things that it's very hard to operate in modern times, with the narratives being the way they are, because these fentanyl overdoses are a great example of the actual empirical disproportionate problems that are happening in poor white communities that the narrative of the time has totally ignored. And when you're talking about the policing and the messages that I've been having, I want us to care, and I want the liberals to care just as much about George Floyd, just as much about the fentanyl overdose that happened, and on the streets of the suburbs of Detroit, as they do care about what happened to George Floyd. I mean, a crackhead criminal, to be honest. And so it's those things that I have a big problem with in society and policing right now. That I as much as I'd like to criticize the police, it seems like institutions like that and of the past are barely maintaining the stability in some of these uh, places that have kind of gone wild since 2015.
How much do you estimate the black market in drugs is worth these days?
I have no idea. I mean, I wouldn't even touch something like that. And it's weird because the black market seems to always undersell things. Here I am in Phoenix, and in Arizona, we have legal cannabis everywhere, but yet still the street can still undercut the market, and like they have low taxes here, and it's still because of the regulation and stuff undercutting the market and producing good
Wow.
products. And in California, they have high taxes on the cannabis, so the underground market is really destroying the legal market. So we have to be very careful about what our policies and our procedures are, when no matter what it is, thinking about, are these a good process, not get focused on the outcome. Is it a good process to highly regulate and legalize the plant? Probably not when we're looking at the market. Is it a good idea to highly regulate and legalize heroin so that you have oxycontins and things like that that you can do harm reduction? Yeah, I think that sounds like a good policy and way to go about things when it comes to
So you think the weight of these taxes then is detrimental to the positive effects that were hoped for?
the positive effects are still there without doubt. I don't want to mitigate or like criticize the things that the positives that have taken place, but where corruption in government maintains their hold on these things, it's still like this pulling back force. It's like kind of going there, but not all the way going there. I mean, for instance, sometimes those good intentions, when we're talking about the OxyContin market, that was in the doctor's hands, and then they cut it off. So yeah, the doctor screwed up a little bit. They overprescribed OxyContin, understand. But when they cut that off, when the federal government cut that off, that's how you ended up with all the overdoses and people heading out to the streets to get the heroin, because you just can't cut it off like that. That doesn't go against human nature. So if we don't go all the way, sometimes the half measure can end up harming more people than just kind of being laissez-faire and leaving things alone.
How transformative in your life was going on Joe Rogan?
So um, some of the artists that I most um, admire will say things like "kill your heroes," and I would very much highly subscribe to that mentality. One thing that media made a very big mistake, Hollywood made a big mistake. They only made this mistake for about a year, but they made a really big mistake letting a regular person with a big mouth that had no vested interests be a guest on their shows. And they let me behind the curtain. And when I went in the government, when I went in the police department, when I went into Hollywood and I went into media, every door I've ever peeked behind was what I expected to be there was not there at all. And that does not that Joe Rogan and the rest of media are no exception to that. So the biggest thing that those scenes did to me was kind of open my eyes to media narratives, and how that is shaping our society, because that's also something that is very critical in my work and the statements that I make. Is I am talking about the management of human beings, of apes. I am not talking about some kind of perfect world, and I need to have everything operate and work in this imperfect, socially constructed world, and be able to overcome these hurdles, just as the ones that you're talking about.
We've got just time for one more question that's come in from one of the viewers, and that is from 12 Step Woman. What do you think about true crime YouTubers getting involved in active missing children cases?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a fan of that. I don't think I ever will be a fan of things like that. Amateurs getting involved in professionals' jobs is usually going to go very bad, especially when it comes to government things. One thing that I can say about peeking behind these doors that I've learned is that things like the president. Now, when we say all these presidents act the same, I would say that's largely true. But what I've noticed is that when you get into these positions, you are exposed to information, and that information wakes you up, and then you start acting and doing the things that the person that before you had that same information does. And it's like, well, I think there's usually a reason why all these things are taking place, and just because the general public doesn't know, sometimes there's a good reason for that. I think the YouTube and the true crime stuff is very humorous because I listen to it and they are always dramatically wrong. I mean, like just on basic weapons things or how police interact with one another. And I don't know whether they're Hollywood or they're the streets when they say something simple like when cops are arguing over cases. So in Hollywood, as the FBI is on one side saying, hey, this is our case, we have jurisdiction here. And the local cops are like, you don't know this town, this is our jurisdiction, this is our case. That's what happens in movies. In real life, the FBI is kicking the body over to our side saying the case is our problem. When we're like, no, 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 he's on the state line. That's a federal problem. This is your case. And they're like, no, 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 this is your case. The reality is the exact opposite. So it's in little things like that. Or in the things of talking about crime, whether you're talking when somebody presents themselves as knowledgeable about crime, without question, the number one correlate to violence is lead poisoning. And as much as that freaks people out, all you simply have to do is type into YouTube or Google or whatever, if Wikipedia, it doesn't matter. Type lead violence correlation, and your mind will be blown about the obvious connection between lead and violence. But here we are when we're doing our best type of policing, a sheriff, that sheriff will sit here and he will have a 4-year interest, try to get reelected. Lead poisoning is a 20-year cleanup goal, and you'll never get there as long as we have people with 4 years of invested interest when we need 20-year goals. So that's why you need things like the community being responsible. Otherwise, how will you ever align 20-year goals?
Yeah. Look also, I mean, further response to that question, look also what the internet sleuths did to that Mexican goth in that Cecil Hotel.
Right, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, ruined his life. Well, we've run out of time.
Good, my battery's going to die soon. So finish it up in case you lose me.
Please let the viewers know where they can find you and support you online.
YouTube, most importantly, just type in my name. You can put Dr. Michael Wood Jr. and it'll come up right away.
All right. Huge thank you for coming on. If there's anything we can do for you, you just let us know. If you ever come to England, love to have a full-length interview with you in the studio there. That would be great.
That would be perfect as long as you don't wear a damn mask. Weirdo.
Yeah, they're chilling out on that now. Thanks, Michael. Cheers.
Yeah.
All right. Good night. Good night.